Today I'm going to talk about the wood dowel tail mod for the Blade CP. I use 1/4 inch diameter wooden dowels to replace the stock tail boom. Since wood dowels aren't as strong as carbon fiber, I'm using a dowel that's about 1/16 inch thicker than the stock tail boom. So the first part of this mod is to whittle down the wood dowel to fit the Blade CP. The fit has to be really snug, because I like to use a retaining pin instead of glue to hold the tail in place. That way it's much easier to change the tail when I'm at the flying field. After making a bunch of these tail booms, I've got a couple tips I'd like to share with you. The first thing I do is to take a rough pass, creating a slight bevel to fit into the tailpiece. This way you can use the tailpiece itself to create a groove and help guide you as to the thickness. Just apply some pressure while rotating the tail to create the groove. Now you should have a good guide as to where to place the knife and cut the right diameter. Then it's just a matter of cleaning up the fit. You can see here that my index finger hits the top of the boom, safely keeping the knife from sliding too far down. You'll have to repeat these 3 steps for the end that fits into the frame, and because it goes in a little bit deeper, there's a little bit more material that has to be removed. Now that the ends are fitted properly, I need to drill some holes for the retaining pins that are going to be used to hold this in place. Usually after fitting the tail boom into the main frame, you'll find that it skews slightly in one direction. Here I'm rotating the tail boom and eyeballing it to position that skew to bend the tail slightly upwards instead of to the sides or down. Now using a small hand drill, I start drilling a hole, but I remove the tail from the frame once it started to make it easier to finish drilling the hole. Fitting the tail piece is the same, except this time you're eyeballing to make sure that the tail piece is in the right orientation in relationship to the main frame. Again, I start the drill hole with the tail piece on, but then remove it to make it easier to finish drilling. Finally, I mark the orientation with a pen to make it easier to remember when mounting. This is especially helpful when I make a bunch of booms at once. Mounting the boom on the Blade CP itself is quite straightforward and quick. Simply insert your tail boom into the frame, and then use a retaining pin to hold it in place. Using a retaining pin here makes it easy to fix this on the spot without having to go back to the bench after a crash. I've drilled a hole through the top of the motor mount for the tail so that I can also use a retaining pin to hold it on. In this case, the retaining pin also doubles as a flexible landing gear. I use masking tape to secure the wires, which I find a little more convenient than zip ties. While not completely necessary, I like to overlap the masking tape with the tail mount to make it even more secure. Since it can be a pain to remove the stock tail boom, while I'm wrapping this up, I'd like to take a second to start talking about how simple it is to remove this one. With the wood dowel boom, it tends to break off right at the frame. First I use a drill to remove some of the material. Then a gentle push with a small screwdriver dislodges the tail. Then it can be easily picked out with a pair of needle nose pliers. If you're also using the crash-proof landing gear mod, there's a little trick you can use to fix a tail boom that wasn't fit snug enough. Just squeeze the landing gear a little with a pair of pliers to tighten up the fit. If you're careful about making a snug fit while making the tail boom, this isn't necessary. So that's basically it for the wood dowel tail boom. I usually create these 3 or 4 at a time so I can have some spares that I can quickly swap in if I need to while I'm flying. Now I want to take a moment to compare the stock tail boom with the wood dowel tail boom. They're similar in length and they're approximately the same weight. Although I found with the wood tail boom the weight can vary by around a gram or so. While it isn't always the case, this particular one comes in 1.5 grams lighter than stock. Now if we compare the cost at 17 cents each, it comes in a bit cheaper than stock. Finally, let's take a look at how this flies. I haven't noticed any performance difference between this and the stock tail, although the wood dowel does seem to crack a bit easier than the stock tail boom during a crash, but actually I kind of prefer that a part that's cheap and easy for me to replace takes the force of the crash rather than it be transferred somewhere else and break something that's more difficult or expensive to replace. Anyhow, thanks for watching my video. If you want to check out some longer clips of me flying with the wood dowel tail boom, you can find some in my Run Rider gallery.